Let's do this. Cheers, guys.
All right.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers.
And this fade out after we do this? And then fade back in.
Ever. What was your favorite primary race in this cycle, and why was it your favorite?
The entire Cantor race for me was interesting because I know so many people who live in the Richmond area and live in that district, and people who've told me stuff for years about the district being drawn purposefully to re-elect Eric Cantor, and that is the purpose of the district. In particular, a friend of mine who lives there likes to tell this story about the transition that Eric Cantor went through, where he was at the 2008 convention, and Cantor was going around, and he stopped him and introduced himself, and I actually live in your district, and told him the town that he lived in, and Cantor immediately responded by saying, oh, well, we actually just, we just paid for this bridge to be put, in that town, and that was going to be an earmark, and then he stopped himself, and then he said, but we don't do that anymore. And to me, I think, Cantor's out of nowhere upset was just the one thing that this cycle really seemed to be an indication of how you can have foregone conclusions about the ways things are going to work out.
What I found fascinating about that race, and I've now screwed up the circle, but
It's okay.
we're all drunk, so who cares? Was so much of the plans were almost completed. The immigration compromise was all ready for basically when Congress got back in July.
Yeah.
They were at. I never use football metaphors. The best one is really they were like at the 1 yard line, and then all of a sudden this guy gets sacked. Everything falls apart.
If you view as I do, the role of consultants, and you can speak up for them.
I probably won't, because I actually have a very disparaging view of my own.
But I mean,
Both
this really
Republicans and
was a
consultants,
fun race because it was a perfect example of, how the current consulting practices on the right in particular do not reward success and do not reward, sort of intelligent and innovative approaches. They reward.
I think I would say that there are a lot of problems that are very close to that particular one within the party overall, and I think a lot of the primaries this season, when you were saying pick your favorite primary, I'm sort of thinking, well, in terms of sort of, watching a car crash, I mean, we can find plenty of things that you could say were your favorite in terms of the destructiveness and just the sensationalism. But
from the media perspective,
but generally,
with that, like it was a NASCAR match, we're all waiting for somebody to screw up, and then no one did.
Well, but just generally, I mean, looking at it, I mean, I find it hard to say, as a Republican and as a consultant, that there's anything that I consider to be really particularly good about most of what happened, because basically we just had a bunch of primaries where we had a disastrous candidate and a disastrous candidate, and let's pick our poison.
Explain to the viewers what the Mississippi race was. You don't have to look at the cameras.
Like,
no one's actually watching.
A really old dude who there's a fairly good chance, I think, probably can't write down his address or spell his name anymore correctly.
Coping with senility.
Yeah. We're talking about that guy.
Versus a guy who pretty much, I'm going to get in tons of trouble for saying this, but pretty much came off as being a complete nutbag racist and bullying a bunch of criminals. Wow, that is a Republican. You know what I want? I want one of those two people to be my standard bearer.
Well, empty your reporter notebook if you can. Like, what actually went wrong with his campaign?
I think somebody at some point used a comparison of him running for, I'm going to get this wrong, but emperor instead of sheriff.
As somebody who also lives in Virginia for years, I've been hearing about how Eric Cantor is so focused on becoming speaker that he's forgetting that he's a congressman. And he's not doing.
I mean, was it literally not having earmarks? Is that it?
No, but he just basically was ignoring. He was ignoring a lot of.
There are ways to serve the district without earmarks.
Yeah, he was basically doing a lot of ignoring of fundamental constituency.
There's all those
services.
stories about him in SUVs on the Hamptons.
Well, just there's
you
tons
can make
of
sure
stuff.
the local Republican Party are the people that you choose, even if you're anti. It actually helps if you're against earmarks at this point. You should be in touch with the activists who are going to take over the, Henrico County. I pronounced it wrong, didn't I? Henrico County.
Yeah.
That's all right.
I went to the Michael Barone and I fell on my face.
On Cantor, the one moment that sticks out to me was the YG event with Duthot. Is that how you say it?
No, it's Ross Douthat.
Douthat.
I went to
Ross
high school
Gregory
with the guy.
Douthat.
Yeah.
I just ran into him.
Not that.
in Maine.
Yeah,
You mean
so-
the one with Lee and Tim Scott
Douthat.
at AEI?
Yeah, at AEI.
I got a county in Virginia wrong. You got New York Times.
Yeah, there we go.
Wrong.
It was kind of a charting the path forward for how we're going to address middle class concerns.
So why was this a turning point for you?
Because it was the first time where I think Cantor was actually being somewhat embraced by conservatives in the GOP. I mean, he was organizing this through his Young Guns organization, which is going to be an interesting question, kind of what happens to that. And he was the guy putting together this event to really herald reform conservatism, which is probably one of the most positive developments on the right. Just the fact that
It's definitely the
so
hot
ferment.
thing right now. Yeah.
I want to close the book on Cantor, though.
Okay.
And I don't know why I have a fixation. I just cannot let John McLaughlin off the hook without discussing this. I mean, how can you be so wrong at your job and still have a job? He had Cantor up by 34
Oh,
points.
you're right. No, he was more like 48 points.
Yeah, it was something insanely off.
Yeah.
Like okay. Defend John McLaughlin, please.
Oh, no, I think Liz should answer that.
No, you volunteer. Go for it.
You were nodding the whole time.
You were nodding.
you were nodding.
Yeah, you go first.
I mean,
and
I-
I'll say a few words.
As someone who's been
If we're
wrong
gonna,
a lot.
yes, that's why I was going to answer the question. I don't know. I mean, Republican pollsters, I've talked to Mark Blumenthal here a lot about this. He's the real expert on polling, but they've just had some sort of like systemic problems, to get technical for a minute. Like they've refused to poll off the voter file. I still don't understand why. Democrats have. I think that explains some of why the polling in the Cuccinelli race was off, because, you know, the Republican pollsters, and I think the public pollsters were like only of it. Well, the Republican pollsters refused. The public pollsters don't have voter files, and the Democrats, that was their practice. As far as like why McLaughlin, why anybody can be so wrong, I think it's just like, I guess it's a function of the way that consultants are perceived as, you know, swamis, you know, and so even if there are people who are further up the chain and like running for higher office who are never going to take their business, there's always like down ballot or people in other states who maybe didn't hear about what happened.
So he's going to be working like the county.
And Bob Shrum has won some races they didn't get credit for, but he blew a couple races, went and worked for Senate candidates, won those, came back, lost 2 presidential races, and now he's retired. But he had to take like 15 full rounds of losing in order to be out of the game. And some of the groups that identify themselves as the Tea Party groups got consultantitis and had giant overhead for their staffs, had big plans, had big donor strategies that were not really connected to a winning strategy, and you can't tell the Cantor story without noting that Tea Party Patriots and Freedom Works and a lot of the groups that, well, not Senate Conservatives one would have gotten in it, but a lot of the groups that rushed in and said, we're going to take out Mitch McConnell by the knees, they didn't see it coming, but that's not like they got pay cuts because they blew every single one.
No, they don't. And I think, you know, this is a problem that we have on the right. You know, a friend of mine refers to it as a movement that eventually always becomes a racket. I really liked watching Mississippi.
Let's talk about Mississippi.
Didn't have to vote in it. I was so happy to be a Virginia voter that day. I think
if you're gonna pick, thank you. If you're gonna pick favorite anecdote, it really is Thad Cochran not remembering Molly Ball's name.
Oh my God.
I was standing right there.
Really?
I talked to him. And I guess I'm lucky because she's pregnant and can't have these drinks, so I'm in.
We did
I had a
ask her
similar-
before you, don't worry.
Of course, I would. I had a similar story where I asked him, I like specific question about things he did. I said, I remember I was asking about ads he was running. Like your campaign's pointing out that that a McDaniel supporter, Chris McDaniel supporter, broke into your wife's nursing home. I've heard there's kind of a backlash building against the way you're writing about it. It's like, that's our campaign?
Oh, no.
He had like no idea his campaign was running that ad, just denied completely that he was, but not like in a slippery way, just in a like
an
like
oblivious
squirrel, like that kind of way.
A blue car.
Did he have a handler when you were talking to him?
He had a handler who, during that whole interview, just it's in my tape. This guy's just going like when Sideshow Bob steps on the rake. He's like, he's making this noise which does not induce confidence.
back to the point.
nailed him. I put it in the story, but
Back to the point about staffing.
But the point was, every parachute liberal elitist journalist who got in there had Cochran doesn't seem to know what we're asking him.
He did an event where he spoke. This was probably like a week before the primary, before the 3-week runoff.
Yeah.
And so he finished the event. They drove in their campaign bus around the block to a diner or something around the corner.
As you do.
We walked over, and we walk in behind him. We walk in behind him, I think, or we walk in front of him maybe, and he walks in behind us, and Molly had just interviewed him.
Yeah.
For like an hour or something like that, she said.
Yeah, it was a long
Maybe.
time.
And she says hello to him, and he like introduces himself to her.
How did Cochran win? I mean, what's the one, if you had to pinpoint one thing that made the difference in the runoff, what was it?
Oh no, they turned out voters who had never intended to vote in the Republican primary just by portraying Chris McDaniel as an embarrassing racist. Not even as somebody who would lose, but until it became a scandal, they were starting to kind of brag that we reached out to black voters and made them relevant in Mississippi in a way they're not anymore.
Just to digress a little bit, because obviously we can't talk about the race without all of the stuff around Thad's wife and the pictures and all that stuff. In the end, did that move the dials at all of that?
I think it froze the momentum for McDaniel. I think he would have.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Given how close he was, he would have won.
There's a lot of stuff that you do on campaigns that is purely aimed at jamming the other guy's operation up and basically causing him to waste a crap ton of time on stupid stuff that shouldn't actually. Well, that's what they did. That's what they did, and I think that was actually important to the Cochran guys eking out the win.
Charles Lee Johnson, who is he?
I have no idea.
He's a writer.
Patriot.
Truth teller.
He is a conservative journalist who has had some stories that fell apart, and for that reason has had some trouble getting a regular arrangement with the Daily Caller, for example. I wrote a piece in, it might have been this year. He wrote a couple of takedowns in campaigns I was covering that I thought were flimsy, and then he wrote one piece taking down David Kirkpatrick from the New York Times. Johnson basically fell for a parody story that had been run when he was a student at Princeton. I wrote about that. I first interacted with him that way. I mean, and Johnson is just a true believer who, after I wrote that story, told me, I think it's said publicly on Twitter, so it's not, I'm not like breaking confidence. He has. He's a little bit autistic and doesn't get humor. He's a little bit autistic and he's incredibly obsessive about data. Yeah. He doesn't vote, he says. He just, for some reason, he's gotten on this tack of being a full-time investigator for causes that end up being what the Tea Party's into. But he's...
It just so happens.
It's not like he's angling for a job out of all this. I mean, he's actually hurt his prospects for future jobs. He became sort of a hero for a lot of the kind of revanchist conservatives after the primary in Mississippi because he looked into the ways that Cochran won and argued that it was illegal.
Well, he argued specifically that they paid black voters to go vote for Cochran, right?
A story which has fallen apart a couple of times.
I want to go into two of the duds of this campaign season. Steve Stockman.
Oh, God, I did cover that. It was very strange. He ran for an open seat in 2012. Yeah. Texas got, because it's economically dynamic and because conservative governance works for et cetera, they got like 4 new seats in the redistricting. Yeah. He got to run for one that was incredibly red. If you look at this one part of Texas, you think Texas is conservative. This is the part of Texas that thinks like Rick Perry's too liberal. He won that seat. And then he hired...
Well, yeah, I mean, all those cronies, he helped fund Elon Musk's, latest thing.
Isn't this what we learned in the 2012 debates?
Yes, yeah, he's just a bleeding heart.
Everybody heartless.
Right.
Heartless, yeah.
He won that part. It was like Houston suburbs and up around.
So.
And the staff he hired and the people he associated himself with kind of goaded him into running for Senate, and I still don't know why. Like, I understood their argument for basically the theory that they said to me early on, then they kind of ran this weird Potemkin campaign, was if you got to a runoff, it'd be a low turnoff runoff between somebody that said all the right things and a Senator, Don Cornyn, who's not liberal by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, the theory was if you get him under 40 and you force a runoff then, or under 50, because that's how Cruz got elected. Sure, anyone can win. But the guy just didn't campaign. I think he was just told that if he put his name on the ballot and send a lot of tweets out, then he could.
How many days?
Wait, hold on. You don't think it was like a drunken double dog dare? Because that's kind of.
That would have been more fun. Yeah.
That's honestly, I find that very possible.
It totally could have been. You know,
Half
to
the
sing at a
time,
bar
I've
like
actually
this.
interacted with Steve Stockman.
You don't have the stone.
Yeah.
Half the time,
I bet you
Stockman.
do it.
He's been,
Stockman, just do it and tweet, man. You'll be fine. The other dud that I was going to mention was Liz Cheney.
There's so many different things that Liz Cheney could have done differently. The whole thing didn't make sense to me. And the sad thing, I mean, just as someone who disagrees a lot with Liz Cheney, I would have actually liked to see Liz Cheney in the Senate from a safe Republican seat, just because I think...
Yeah, we actually talked about this quite a bit back.
Because my view is, you know, McCain's old as heck, and Lindsey Graham and Kelly are not as interesting within these things. I would have liked to see the Liz Rand showdown on the Senate floor. It would have been fun.
Yeah.
That actually is true. They would have
Well, now we're just going to see it in a different forum.
That's what I found most interesting about the race, was that Rand went out of his way early on to smear her, not like smear with false things. I mean, to like attack a fellow Republican.
But Liz Cheney is Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
Do you know what that means?
No, but
Smear her with facts.
no, I'm saying he didn't.
Let me just read her last name to you.
He didn't make.
Justin Amash. Is he Al-Qaeda's best friend or just an occasional drinking buddy?
I don't think they drink.
I don't think they drink.
They're like Liz Mayer. They don't drink alcohol.
Well,
Did you
they don't
just
drink
call
in
me
public.
A terrorist?
No, I said
There are similarities, Liz. Neither of you drink.
That's the worst smearing.
That's the first drinking and talking.
I'm hurt.
Is Rhino really less offensive than
We've
terrorist?
gone fishing together. I am deeply
Worse than
personally
Liz Cheney.
God. Yeah.
What was that
I thought you had a heart.
What was that about? Justin Amash is so popular. People love him. He's, you know, he talks freely. He's a prolific tweeter.
What I found is that, so I've covered Amash for years. I thought he was interesting when he got to Congress. He's very responsive to reporters in Washington. He's very responsive to like the libertarian press. He will sign up for any kind of like Ron Paul event. So he gets his name out there with what has been during the Obama era like a rising tendency in the party. And then I wrote about him, had a good time with him, hung out at a parade. I found it like he's actually a bit more withdrawn with local media in Michigan. I mean, he actually did. They went after him not just because of his votes. They thought he had exposed himself to attacks.
Well, that attack was below the belt.
It was both that because he'd voted the wrong way in an abortion bill, that he was pro-abortion, and that he was pro-Al-Qaeda because he had opposed. I think it was Devin Nunes who called him that. But it was because he'd voted the popular way on NSA bills.
Yeah.
And I think
suddenly he was Al-Qaeda's best friend.
I think like the Chamber of Commerce, which had a good cycle, made a bad choice in choosing him as a sacrificial lamb. But he is somebody that the media is not going to come and write about the downfall of the ways they would about Steve Stockman, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, he is a smart, ambitious young guy, and they made an enemy for life out of him.
Having looked at the totality of this primary season, is the Republican Party better or worse off?
I think they're better off. I think they're better off in the year 2014 and in a good position to win, and they could have blown a couple of races they didn't blow.
Which one?
They're in
Georgia.
I think Georgia, the Democratic plan was let's hope they nominate a kook in the runoff, and it didn't happen. I think Mississippi would have been a money-wasting race. Democrats had a plan in place in case McDaniel won. He would have won. He'd be a senator, but
and that would have been a problem.
But it would have forced the Republican establishment to spend some money.
I think they're generally better off because I don't quite believe that. I respect everyone who wrote the Republican Reform Report in 2013 and argued that the party had to be the party of immigration reform. I'm not ready yet to say that is going to kill them in 2016. I just don't.
I'm very cynical about the party, always have been. I'm kind of I'm the self-hater. I don't know. I'm not sure that I think that there's really much substantial difference. I think that there are some races that we should be performing a lot better in, and we're not. And I think that that's typical Republican crap, frankly. As I look at it and I see that we have exactly the same problems facing us.
Yeah.
I don't think that we have substantially more solutions on hand. I think we still have a lot of nutters and a lot of milquetoast people, and generally, I'm still in the same position I ever was. Basically, 98% of Democrats I can't stand, and 90% of Republicans I can't stand. So there you go.
We are the 2%.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things I did in the last year was read Al Fromm's book about the Democratic Leadership Council and the Democrats in the 80s leading up to Clinton's win in the 90s. And Al really stressed, whatever you think of Al, he really stressed that ideas were key to the Democrats coming back in the 90s, like regaining their footing after sort of a decade in the wilderness. And I kind of subscribe to that idea. Maybe it's a fluke of history that this happened, but I generally think ideas matter, and I think there's a real conversation about ideas on the right, and I don't think there's a lot of shibboleth examination going on the left.
Excuse me, what was that?
Shibboleth.
Shibboleth?
There's not a lot of
Were you in
examination.
Barcelona? Is that how you do it?
Did you? You didn't see that episode of West
No, I
Wing?
didn't. Not a West Wing?
I feel like it's slightly better, and it's slightly better only because
Slightly better for who?
for Republicans, the cycle, because I think that they've started to have the conversation that has been too long delayed about their economic agenda and about how they need to relate to the populace as a whole. And I think that that's a positive development. I don't think that they've necessarily taken all the right lessons yet from their experience of the past 10 or 15 years. And I think particularly on foreign policy, there has been an unwillingness to sort of look internally and reevaluate. You have the most recent rounds. I mean, basically it pays off to just sort of, slam your hand down on the table and, I defend America, and isolationism bad. I think that the thing that's going to emerge over the next year or so is there's going to be a lot of these internal debates, and I think that they're, as John said, it's going to be fractious and it's going to be a little difficult, but it's also going to be moving towards something positive, I think, which is the outcome of an agenda that they can actually take to the people.
You're wearing that shirt, which is the J. Crew blue checkered shirt.
Yes.
I congratulate you. I have one myself.
Oh, thank
This
you.
is more the Barack Obama 20.
Yeah. This is not the tan.
There's a red stripe and there's a blue stripe.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
both
I'm getting
awesome
purple.
God.
And two, and I hope this
There
is
is
not
a
too.
blue stripe and a red stripe.
The two is I hope this is not too soon, but I brought you two together because I wanted to show the Washington Post what it's missing.
It's not too soon at all. Absolutely.